All right, guys, we are live. We are live. So I had to come and talk about this. I've been sitting on this for probably like the last week and, kind of gathering my thoughts, listening to all the rhetoric and the feedback and the talk on social media, as well as with those within my intimate circle. And of course, with me being, of course, I'm Lamborghini C. Welcome to the channel. We discuss lifestyle, business, and love relationships over here. But also, I am the HR whisperer. So I had to come and give my take on this whole discussion. So last week, what a week. First of all, what a time to be alive. Like, it is just, I think there's so much opportunity, and it's all in how you look at things. And it's more importantly, it's all in how you position yourself. And that's why I had to come out here. I come out here a little bit selfishly, if I'm honest. I come out here to be able to educate and uplift and expand the minds of those who would listen to this video. For those who are in my personal circle, those who are connected to me, whether by friend or family or just pure network, my hope is that I will be able to educate you and help expand your mind and maybe see how you can maneuver through what for some has been devastating news, right? As of the last week. I don't take it lightly. I know that, especially within my field, there are peers of mine that have, they dug their heels into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they really made it their life's work. They built a career out of it. And so I can only imagine how that must feel to have last week with our new president actually put a ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, let's talk about that a little bit deeper because unfortunately, there have been folks that are, out here with misinformation around what actually is occurring. Some of them are being selfish in their deliveries. You have your Roland Martins, your other paid political pundits, right? And let's keep it real. They are paid. This is their job. Their livelihood depends on this, right? And so, again, this creates a huge shift, right? Because a lot of, what they've been focused on and a lot of, what they come in the media with in their stories, it centers around that whole affirmative action, DEIB, and things of that nature, right? And so now it's going to force them to pivot. And the reality is, I would argue that both them and some others should have pivoted a while ago. I know that I was compelled a few years ago. I feel like it was, I was led by God. It was a spirit led thing. I wrote a book called A Case for Cultural Competence in Business because several years ago I stepped away from the whole DEI initiative and I started to because I became enlightened around cultural competence. And I'll go into kind of why I started to veer toward cultural competence and felt so strongly about it that I wrote a book about it that's out on Amazon.com. And and I think that those feelings hold true today and are even validated, right? And I really can see and understand why that pivot, although albeit maybe before its time, was the right pivot to make. But first and foremost, let's talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And then over the years, they've actually added another one, which is the whole belonging, which I loved. And I was excited that they actually added that. And as I have this discussion, I'm going to be sure that I show you the references of where I'm getting like my data and metrics. Because we're going to talk data and metrics because men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. Okay. So people can say whatever they want. They can operate out of their emotion, but I want to keep this factual based. That's the other reason I felt compelled to like come and like have some discussion from the HR whisperer's point of view, because I'm seeing people lose it. I'm seeing people crash out, as the young kids would say. I'm seeing people that are like, when I've talked to them, I can hear the quivers in their voice. I can hear the angst in their whole person around this subject matter. And yes, it's serious. It is very serious. It is a humongous shift for our country. But I want to make sure that, again, your concerns and your feelings are rooted and grounded in fact based information and not fear mongering. Okay. So let's just, first of all, I want to talk about what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we've been hearing a lot about it this past week, right? And so if we go to diversity, equity, and inclusion on Google, and here's the thing, we can find a lot of these things right out here on Google, which is the interesting thing about it, right? Oops, I'm sharing. Okay. Let me go into our presenter mode. So we have the sound on. We're going to share the window here. Okay. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a term used to describe policies and programs that promote the participation and representation of people from different groups. That's important. So let's just stop there. DEI is a term that describes policies and programs. It's not law. It's not law. Okay. Now let's go down to, again, further go into these definitions. Diversity is the presence of differences among people, including their race, ethnicity, and gender, sexual orientation, age, and socioeconomic class. Understanding and celebrating these differences. Equity is the concept of fairness, ensuring that people have the resources that they need to access the same opportunities. And inclusion is composed of actions that foster feelings of being valued, respected, and embraced, accommodating different needs and perspectives, and promoting open and respectful dialogue. DEI is a framework that governs ethical and legal practices in organizations and society. Many corporations are encouraged, and in some jurisdictions, legally mandated to adhere to DEI standards. Okay. So DEI in and of itself was not a law by itself, right? It was mandated for those who receive government contracts to have a policy, again, because it's policies and programs that foster this um, equity and acknowledgement and celebration of diversity within organizations. So it was a way to help ensure that those organizations that were receiving government funds were actually adhering to the initiatives to promote diversity, equity amongst different groups within those organizations, and representation, right? So that's how we get into like the affirmative action side of things. And so the way that they sought to do those things were, and I've been part of this, I've actually had to lead many of these initiatives myself with my role in HR, and especially in the Fortune 50 companies that I was a part of, being oftentimes like sometimes the only minority, the only Black woman or person in the team. I always got the lucky straw to lead the diversity groups and lead the diversity trainings, right? And so the way that they would make sure that those things took place is oftentimes you would have like a diversity training. Some organizations mandate, diversity, equity, and inclusion training. I've worked for some of those organizations, right? And I've led those trainings, those initiatives. And I have to tell you, again, later in my career, as I became exposed to the concept of cultural competence, which is used highly in healthcare. That's why my book is named A Case for Cultural Competence in Business, because cultural competence is pretty known in the healthcare industry, but not so much in business. I noticed the difference, right? Because I had my own data points to be able to pull from. I noticed the difference in the interaction with the groups, with the individuals within my classes when I would teach these sessions, compared to when I was standing up in front of them and teaching the diversity, equity, and inclusion classes. I think that over the years, the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there was so much emphasis on it and these programs, the way in which they were rolled out and the way in which it was mandated, so to speak, it for some individuals it was a check. It was for, something that they needed to check the box on, right? Let me just go ahead and get this class over with. I don't know, I don't want to attend this class, but the company says I have to, all employees have to attend. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to kind of sit through there, and listen, right? But not really leaving with any impactful experience or information that would spark them to change, perhaps, or open their vantage point at how they saw the world or saw others, or more importantly, how they saw their coworkers. So I wrestled with the fact that sometimes it felt ineffective, right? And when I became introduced to cultural competence, I noticed something different, because cultural competence, on the other hand, it has a different um, kind of purpose, right? The meaning is a bit different, and so let's go through that meeting, okay? And so cultural competence is the ability to interact with people from different cultures and belief systems. It's a set of skills and behaviors that help people communicate effectively and appropriately. And I think that was the huge difference for me, because I saw that while I was teaching and holding workshops around cultural competence, my focus was around equipping the individuals in those workshops and classes with skills to be able to function and interact better, to be able to understand and maybe look introspectively at why they may have had certain norms that were norms to them, or why they may have had certain biases, right? And in the realization that we all have some biases of some sort within us. Again, it can even go down to where you graduated from college, right? And those things can play a factor into the recruiting hiring practice. I have witnessed it, I've lived it, right? I've worked partnered hand in hand with managers through the years for whom them and I shared the same alma mater, okay, the great Michigan State University, okay, and and there's times where I've had to call it out, where I've noticed a tendency to gravitate to the students that came from that school versus other schools, right? And so again, these biases can show up in so many different ways. So it's not outlandish to think that biases don't show up when it relates to gender and race, right? But I think the way in which DEI has been rolled out over the years and the mandates and things around it, it created this atmosphere in many of these corporations and work environments where people became so scared to have these admissions and really have true open dialogue to really begin to grow and change their mindset and thoughts on some of these things, that it became more punitive, right? So folks didn't want to admit that, hey, yeah, I prefer working with other men, you know, or I do, prefer to have, my team all male, my team of engineers all male, right? And there weren't enough discussions to dive into, well, why is that? What is it that you fear, or what is it that is a concern for you of adding females into your team and into your workplace, and stretching their mind to see that they can have effective teams and effective work systems with those more diverse groups, right? And so that is why, for me, I gravitated toward um, the discussion around cultural competence. I just felt like it was a more effective, a more thought provoking conversation that really put the onus on the individuals versus, in all honesty, sometimes when I would teach those DEI courses or workshops, it felt like I was up in front of a class lecturing to individuals that, hey, you shouldn't have these feelings and you shouldn't feel this way, right? Or at least when you're, behind the walls of the work or the office space, you can't exhibit these behaviors. And so that is a much different concept, much, much different. So now I want to just take a break and venture into what happened last week, right? The first day of Donald Trump's presidency. I believe it was the first day. It definitely was the first week. He signed so many executive orders, but he signed an executive order to ban DEI for DEI programs and DEI funding for government agencies, and to drop the mandates for those private sector companies that were receiving government contracts, right? So, also, if you've worked in corporations and have been in HR or management, you probably know of an initiative that we would have to go through the whole AAP reporting and all of those things, and rolling out that data and dissecting it, and looking at your representation and things like that. That was mandated. Like, you had to go through those initiatives and come up with plans to be able to, um, like, if you saw that you had lower representation in one group or area, then you had to come up with plans or initiatives to be able to, increase those things, right? And so that's what drove, some of the initiatives around, like the funding for such programs, maybe of where you would recruit, um, where you might donate to get exposure for your company and things like that, right? And so those dollars are going away and being put into a larger bucket. Now, if we research further and we look online, we will see that, um, there are some documented publications and such that state that, um, as much as $8 billion annually is being spent on DEI initiatives, right? And so, again, those monies, I'm sure, will be reallocated and put into a different bucket. Now, something that I do want to go over and just touch on, because this is where the information gets a little bit fuzzy and blurry for folks, and where the angst really begins to come into play, and it's disheartening for me. So while Trump banned DEI for the government, contracts and government agencies. Again, and we know even prior to Trump taking office, many corporations, some of the larger ones, already had begun to back up from their DEI initiatives, right? And it was during that time I challenged the folks that were in those organizations, and in those roles, to begin to ask themselves, how were they going to pivot? Because I truly believe there's a way to make sure that you still have, um, some initiative around the cultural competence, right? And, non discrimination in the workplace, without having that DEI organization. So, in absence of that, what is the solution? Right? I was trying to move people to what is the solution. Let's talk and let's strategize around that versus just complaining and falling out and saying, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. Because guess what? They did it. Right? And so, one of the things that I want to highlight to people, and I had to highlight this to someone last week, right? Because we kind of got on this discussion. While Trump banned DEI, he did not and could not on his own ban Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Okay. And so Title VII protects against hiring and firing. Employers cannot refuse to hire or fire employees based on protected characteristics. Compensation. Employers cannot discriminate against employees in their compensation. Promotion. Employers cannot discriminate against employees in their promotion. Job advertisements. Employers cannot discriminate in job advertisements. Training. Employers cannot discriminate in training programs. Benefits. Employers cannot discriminate in retirement plans, leave, and benefits. Hostile work environments. Employers cannot create a hostile work environment that's based on discrimination. And accommodation. Employers must reasonably accommodate employees' needs, such as religious observation. Okay? And so it is important for us to have this conversation with all of the rhetoric that's going on, with all of the news media that I feel is misinforming um, our communities, especially the Black community, because I'm in the community. And when I tell you the, I kind of take offense to it because I think that there's some folks that are approaching our community who are in the community. And the assumption is that we're not educated enough or we don't read enough on our own. And that they can come and just tell us anything and get us riled up and worked up. And trust me, I've seen folks online posting things. What do you think about this? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And some of these people have the nerve to be getting PhDs or either have them already. And I'm like, if you do not go and read and research something for yourself and you're listening to these people, again, many of these folks that are fear mongering, their jobs depend on this. The reality is, even with DEI, and I'm going to talk straight, even with DEI in place, many of us, like, especially if you were someone of color, a Black person that was successful, like in those corporate spaces, you were still dealing with some of this nonsense, right? And the reality, I'm going to go over some metrics for you. Do you understand and know who, like, the largest benefactor of many of these programs has been? Like, we need to talk about that and have a conversation around it. And I even heard someone today, like, again, just a misinformed girl, right? Um, trying to say that, well, she was talking bad about, I think it was a statement. She played a clip from Dr. Umar Johnson and then was trying to say, oh, what is he talking about? Is he trying to say that, DEI isn't needed? Well, it's the same thing as affirmative action. And the reality is it's not. It's like they're two different buckets, right? They were both to work together along the same or similar initiative. But again, along the way, things got distorted because, again, with the DEI and with the mandates, some individuals found a way to work around the system. So while it was in place, again, it wasn't benefiting, I think, the folks that initially it was set out to benefit. Now, I'm going to go to an article from 2023 from Aparna on LinkedIn. You guys can go find it yourself if you would like to read the entire article, but it is entitled Why White Women Won DEI. Okay. And so This article is very interesting, and as she lays out some of the metrics, like she says, the data is clear. Okay, I'm going to highlight it for you. Over the past 10 years, white women not only hold the majority of executive roles, which is 70 to 80%, but are also the best compensated for this work with the longest tenures. Okay. And that's even as budgets have been slashed and women of color, in particular Black women, have left organizations. There have been few high profile exits of white DEI leaders over the past year. Okay. And here she has her chart and her graph where you can see some of the metrics here, right? And I'll be honest with you, I've seen it like throughout my career because, again, the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, it was set up such that it created and fostered this uncomfortable environment, right? No matter who you were. And so, one of the ways that I saw organizations get around it was they would go the comfortable route. And sometimes for them, that comfortable route was to promote the woman, right? And oftentimes a white woman. And that's what they felt comfortable with. And they felt like, okay, we met our metrics. We have diversity on our team, right? And so they weren't really tackling and addressing um, the issues around Title VII, which we all know, like the civil rights, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Again, that came into play. Let's not fool ourselves and act crazy. It was came out of the civil rights movement. Who was part of the civil rights movement? Who was leading the civil rights movement? It was for the equality of Black people. But still, in this country, we have issue with saying that we're doing something for Black people. There's still a stigma around that. The other thing with these DEI initiatives, again, because there's dollars attached to them, another ill that I witnessed is that, again, many times you'd have these organizations that would get government funding and grants, and it's almost as though they would try to do anything that they could, but give it or put it in the hands of the communities that had the majority of the Black people, right? And sometimes it was done. I'd like to think that it was done out of ignorance, out of not knowing. There have been times that I have had to, again, educate, right? I've had to be tactful and educate some of those programs and organizations and let them know that, hey, I understand like where your heart is and where you want to make impact, and you think that you are um, operating under the vein of helping to bridge the gap of the inequities amongst um, certain communities, but you're missing a whole community. You're missing the whole Black community. And this was in Detroit proper. Detroit proper, that before all the gentrification that has taken place um, to date, during that time, it still was on average, I think the numbers and metrics were coming back where it was about 80% African American. And I know those numbers and I know them greatly because I was actually with an organization and I was, kind of the interface with the city with some complaints that they had and some initiatives with the lack of representation at the organization that was located in the city of Detroit, right? Compared to the population that lived there. And so when I would see these organizations, or talk with them, because oftentimes, the leaders or what have you would come and talk with me in my office, or I may go to their establishment and we talk about where they had their programs. And these were great initiatives, great charities where they were giving away food and clothing and helping people with their energy bills and to get them paid and find housing and car vehicles. There's programs out there that will buy people whole cars, okay, to make sure they can get back and forth to work, They're not brand new cars, you're not getting no Lambo. But again, the whole point is to make sure that you have a reliable vehicle to get you back and forth to work. But guess what? Those programs, again, I'm talking Detroit, Michigan, because again, I'm talking straight up facts here. They were not going in the Black community. They were going in um over in Mexican town, right? Okay, Southwest Detroit. Mexican town. Now, here's the kicker. Now, Southwest Detroit kind of has two sides. I never knew this. It has a Black side and then it has the Mexican side, the Latino side. So these organizations, oftentimes, when they'd allocate their dollars, they say, okay, we're allocating the dollars in Detroit, the city of Detroit, in Southwest Detroit, right? So we're, hitting the diverse areas. And some of them claimed, because I would challenge them and I would ask them exactly like what zip code are these programs and initiatives located in. And then I would show them, we'd pull out the map and I say, well, you're missing a whole area. This actually is my area. I had adopted that area. And, you know, through relationships, I believe through building, those good relationships and educating, I was able to successfully bring some of those programs into those areas that were being missed, right? Unfortunately, like that was just a small subset, you know. I know the folks that were there were thankful for the work that I did, the little bit. Again, and that's just a little bit. But even imagine like when you don't have somebody that's speaking up and somebody that's educating and showing, hey, you're missing a whole subset of people here, right? So your programs and your initiatives that you think you're rolling out, they're really not helping to solve the solution that you think they're solving. And so, or hitting all the people that you think that you're touching. And so again, I think that, in my opinion, um these programs were started with the thought process of doing well, but I think through the years people found ways to come in and manipulate them to skew the outcomes of those programs. And if I'm honest about it, I'm not completely hurt. You're not going to see me crying about the absence of these programs. Okay. And that might be a shocker for some people. But when I look at all these articles, again, all this information that's available to us on the World Wide Web, if we just take a look in a moment ourselves to do our own research, right, instead of sitting in front of the screen, listening to somebody who actually has a monetary motivation to get you all riled up and get you all, anxious and have anxiety and fear to go into your jobs and things like that, right? Again, this article's from 2003, right? Who benefits from diversity and inclusion efforts, right? So we go down here. This is from Forbes, all right? And so they talk about, again, it's been white women that have often benefited from those programs. Okay. And Black women are less likely to have access to the same support and advocacy as white women. Black women, who are often numerically underrepresented in professional occupations, regularly grapple with how to counteract negative racial stereotypes that undermine their professional images in the office. In response, they often have to strategically engage in code switching by adjusting their speech, appearance, and behaviors and try to fit in. I know about it, okay? And so, again, like we see the data points here over and over and over again. And again, it's just, I needed to come and share this and have this conversation because, like I said, I've been seeing people literally make folks so anxious about existing in this world, because these programs have gone away. I also want to make it clear, right, for business owners, because again, like, you do a disservice when you put this misinformation out there. And so some of you may have business owners thinking that they no longer have to adhere to the actual law that is put in place, right? The Civil Rights Act, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And that is a lie. That is a lie, right? No, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still in place, and organizations are still expected to adhere to them. So that's regardless if they've rolled back those diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, right? And so it's going to be imperative that you stay on top of that, that um, call attention and have facts and data when you do see disparities. And I know that it happens. I've had whistleblowers come to me and share their stories with me of years past, right? Like, I know that in the 60s and in the 70s, for a fact, I had an individual share a story with me. She's a white woman, of how she worked for this organization and they set her at the front desk as the admin, and she would have people come and drop off the resumes, because we weren't, back then they weren't using like the internet. You didn't have like a recruiting platform that you send your resume into. And she actually was instructed by her boss that when someone black brings their resume and drops it off, to put a little check mark on the back of the resume. And that was their way to know and to distinguish, right, regardless of name, who the black candidates were. And so finally she noticed, after like a month or two went by, none of the black people were getting hired, the people she was putting a little mark on the back of the page. So she asked them about it, and they were kind of straight with her, you know, and told her, because again, she was a white woman, that, hey, because we don't want to hire those people. And, again, she says that she was so hurt by that, and she raised the issue, but eventually they pushed her out. She actually ended up having to quit the job and leave the job. Um, so no justice was done there. But I know those things happen. But it's time. You're going to have to speak up when they do. And you're going to have to not let yourself get so riddled with this anxiety and depression around the fact that there's been a ban on DEI for the government sectors. And guess what? Many of the corporations, many of the privately held corporations are going to follow suit. But there's also some leaders that have said, know what? I'm digging my heels in and taking a stance on this. I like that we actually have, initiatives to try to better our culture. And one of those that I saw as of late, again, I think we all have heard about Costco. We all have probably seen about Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase. I like Jamie Dimon. Um, but, he's getting pressure from the board. Now, who's to say? The board may win out in the end, right? Because of the politics of it. But, he says that he's trying to dig his heels in. And so I just wanted to come and share that little bit of data. I had a few more articles and things, but I think that you get the point, right? And I would even challenge you again. Begin to look in cultural competence. Begin to get creative and strategic. For all these people, I meet all these wonderful people, and almost all of them tell me how they are strategic, that they have a strategic role in their organizations or in business. So I want to challenge you to begin to pull on that strategic ability that you hold within yourself, and that leadership executive ability that you hold within yourself. And I want you to begin to come up with solutions, right? Look at cultural competence. How can you infuse that into your workplace? Now that we don't have, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, how can this tie to the bottom line? Because it will. I bet your bottom dollar it will. You need people that are culturally competent within your organizations who can travel around the world and do business globally with other cultures. How do you train and upskill them? Could that be the pivot for you if you are someone that focused your entire career on DEI? I think that I think it would be a smooth transition because it takes some of the same concepts of DEI, but it goes deeper and takes a little bit more of an introspective look and approach to um, working with individuals and working with organizations. And so I think, I don't feel like all is lost. I don't feel like the door is completely shut on just being able to have inclusive work environments. Again, what's being said is that these initiatives were, or that this initiative was done to remove DEI from the government sectors to focus on having a more merit based approach, right, to hiring and promotions and selection of people, right? And so that's another initiative I think folks need to look at as well. You know, we've talked about it on this channel for I think the last couple years that I've had this channel. What are you doing to upskill yourself, especially in this day and age of technology? You need to be a tech genius. There's no excuse that you aren't learning this technology and how to use it. I've often said about the HR community, but I think it goes for all jobs where people are worried about AI taking their job. It's not AI that's going to take your job, but it's the people that know how to use AI that will take your job. And so you need to make sure that you're one of the people that know how to use it and knows how to use it good and effectively, right? So I would be curious to hear what you guys think about this whole DEI initiative thing. Um, and again, just one more fact I want to share with you all, right? Because again, I've seen people almost like they're brought to tears when talking about this. And I do realize some people just love the beautiful lie. And I get it. I get it. You know, I kind of liken it to, in the dating world when you might meet that young man, that fine man who just he looks good, he sounds good, he knows how to tell you all the right things. But honey, he is playing you, okay, in your face the whole time. But it looks good and it sounds good. Some of us like the beautiful lie. And I found some other facts in data to be able to again just illustrate for you how that beautiful lie works, right? Because I found some data that talked about how the advertising dollars were being awarded to different demographic groups of individuals, right, under this DEI initiative. And so when we look at here, it gives us the percentages of the advertising contract dollars that were obligated to minority-owned businesses by racial and ethnic groups during the periods of 2014 and 2023. And we can see here that 47% of that went to the Hispanic American owned businesses, 21% went to the Black owned businesses, 18% went to the subcontinent Asian American owned businesses, 10% to Native American businesses, 3% to Asian Pacific, and then 1% to other, right? So it's a diverse group. We can see that the Black American owned businesses weren't getting the majority of it. But then here's where the beautiful lie comes into play, because this is often what is shared with us and what's often put into the news and what gets our eyes swirling. And we think, oh, wow, we're getting somewhere, right? Because I want us to really look at this insightfully. Now, this chart shows us the percentages of minority owned businesses awarded advertising contracts by racial and ethnic groups. during the fiscal years of 2014 to 2023. Now, if we're only shown this data point, we would look at it and say, wow, finally, Black America is on top. So the Black American owned businesses are receiving the highest percentage of contracts, okay? Right at 36%. And Hispanic Americans are receiving 24%. And Native Americans are receiving 13%, and Asian Pacific Americans are receiving 11%. And subcontinent Asian Americans are receiving 10%, and others are receiving 6%. Now, anybody that knows me knows I like math, and math was something my dad promoted because he made sure I knew how to count some money. And so when I look at these numbers, I have some questions. How is it that the Black Americans receive 36% of the contracts, the highest percentage, but they only receive 21% of the dollars? So that means they loaded them up with contracts, and some of those contracts were meaningless. Some of those contracts might have been like $500 contracts. You know what I'm talking about. Because some of y'all are in the community and some of y'all are the ones getting these little measly awards, right? And you think, oh, at least I got a contract, at least I got a grant, $500 or $1,000. Okay, because that's the only way this could work out. But then you have, like, when we look at the numbers, 24, our Hispanic brothers and sisters have gotten 24% of the contracts awarded to them, but yet and still they ended up with 47% of the dollars. So that tells me that, okay, while they may have gotten a few less contracts, their contract values were more. Okay. The same when I look at um, some of these other groups here, right? Or actually, no, when I look at some of these other groups, it looks like they almost are kind of on par. Like they're not too far off. Like our Native Americans, they received 13% of the contracts, but accounted for about 10% of the funding. That's still a little bit, closer, right, in range. And the Asian Pacific American owned businesses, they actually, now they were done kind of the same way. They got a higher number of contracts awarded to them, but only 3% of the funds of the money, right? So, as they say, the devil is in the detail, and you have to look at the numbers and examine the numbers, and you have to ask questions. You can't always take things on face value, right? And so, again, I'm glad that I remembered to share that because, again, when I looked at that, I thought, wow, I can see how some of us like can get so caught up and confused and think, well, but I thought, like I've been told XYZ. But again, you have to kind of look a little bit beyond just the surface of things and what is actual reality and what's actual factual and begin to ask some of the questions. And so I say that to say, yes, I think that DEI, when it was initially formed and rolled out, I think the folks that worked on those programs and getting that approved had all the best intentions at hand. I think that over the years, as people began to um, intentionally find ways to work around the system, to be divisive in the system and the rollout, I think that folks became disenfranchised with it. And again, it became just another thing to check off of their box, another requirement that they just had to complete or get through. And so I think that that watered it down, and it watered down the effectiveness of it. And it really stopped being a tool or resource to be able to move the needle forward in the initiatives that we were trying to accomplish and achieve. And so, you know, again, I say that to say, just sit back and think about some of this stuff. You know, begin to ask yourself, if, again, if this was a career that you were part of, how can you begin to pivot? Even if your company has not rolled back the initiatives, the reality is they probably are going to in the near future. So you can start working on your game plan now in your pivot so that you don't miss a beat. Um, but for those folks that have found themselves in such a state where they literally are shaking and crying and so upset and distraught around the end to diversity, equity, and inclusion being promoted with the government contracts and government agencies, I challenge you to expand your mind. Expand your mind and look for other solutions and other alternatives. It's not the end for you. It's not the end all be all. Make sure that you do have those credentials to be able to stand, in competition and, based upon merit. Make sure that you are, if you are a leader within these organizations, that you're not only challenging yourself, but you're also challenging your peers, right? To make sure that they are doing that merit based hiring and not letting people get hired just based on legacy or, who they know, but that you are helping to build organizations that truly are looking at people's merit, their skills, and their ability to be able to do the jobs and perform. And that's my take from the HR Whisper. And for my business owners, don't get caught up in this stuff thinking that you don't have to adhere to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, because guess what? You'll be calling me saying, like, hey, I got myself in this issue. What are we gonna do? But again, make sure that you're doing some research for yourself, right? Find a trusted, HR business partner, HR consultant, and an employment law attorney that can work with you to help you better understand how you can navigate these waters so that you don't find yourself in a situation where, again, because you heard a short, 30 or 60-second TikTok video or Instagram video, that you think that, like, hey, I get to throw this whole thing out the window, because that's not the case either. Thank you guys for your time. Good night.